So while you were doing that, as you were doing all that, what you don't know is that I brought my giant camera, and you can't see it, but I took your picture. There you are. By the way, thank you all for getting the memo and wearing your uniforms to class today.
Always.
So I was observing you every minute. Yeah, you look fabulous. Have I told you you look fabulous in the choir robes? You really do. Exactly. That's right. And I know you're identifying who's who, and you're like, yeah, there's Jimmy right there on the third row.
I'm in the top row, second.
I'm glad you're enjoying that. So as the teacher, as you guys were taking your 30 seconds and as you were singing, and although it was projected here, you also had it on paper, I was watching you. That's my job. My job is to observe while you guys are doing what you do. And in a class with nobody on the spectrum, nobody with an IEP, nobody that's 504, nobody that qualifies for special ed, you and I both know that hidden in plain sight, you're going to have students that have no idea what's going on. They've been, you were talking about, this is like sophomore JV choir, and they've been in choir since 6th grade, and they just never got it. And they're sitting right next to this kid who's probably going to make All-State 3 years in a row, starting their sophomore year, all in the same class. That's our job. That's what we do. And the differentiation we're going to talk about today is this scenario. Can we be clear on that since we've spent so much time in special education? We're just talking about this. So the purpose of our little work today, as you can read here, is we're going to talk about differentiation, where we're talking about providing accommodations, not by law, but because this is what we have to do so that everybody learns. But also extensions for those really ahead of the curve students who we'll talk about in a minute are the ones that most often get left out. So we're talking about accommodations and extensions specifically for students that for this particular task are on different kind of ends of the ability for what we're doing today. In this case, we're talking about sight singing and solfege systems. So let's talk about what the research says about this really quick. I've got 4 really key studies up here. The first one specifically talks about the fact that with the focus on literature preparation and performance practice and all the things we're getting ready to go sing our concerts, nationwide, the time that we devote to music literacy, this particular topic, tends to be lacking. The middle 2 specifically talk about, you see we get gifted here and gifted. You know, you've got your bell curve, right? And what we're talking about here is that the students that kind of tend to sit here, and again, we're not talking about 504 and special education. We're just talking about students in general, just their general abilities. The students that live down here, they're the ones that tend to get all the attention. If you have a student that's really struggling, that's where you go. And that's what this kind of says. And what happens is, the students at this end just kind of get left to just fend. What happens to them? They kind of tend to get bored, disconnect, disengage, maybe even drop your class eventually because they're just not getting enough out of it. So what we're talking about here, and that's this last one here, is that you've got to kind of find a way in the same classroom without having to spend hours planning 3 different lesson plans. That's the other piece of the equation. To be able to kind of address everybody's needs all at the same time. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. Why? Because when you teach to the middle, you lose both of these. If you teach to the middle, which is kind of the common practice when I was growing up, you lose them both. So here's how we do it. You and I both know that you can take any given skill. Think of a skill-based thing that you do in your discipline at any given level, like your JV level high school students. And you can walk in the room by the time you've been doing it for a little while, and every one of those students can tell you where they are. They're like, oh man, my technique, my scales, I can do that in my sleep. Or, yeah, I'm good with sight reading, I got it. For a kid that's like, yeah, I just kind of fake it till I make it and just kind of sing along with everybody because I never got it. They know exactly where they are. And if you think back to when you were that age, you remember exactly where you were at any given point. You're like, when it comes time to sing a solo, I'm going to be first in line, but don't ask me to sight read for a grade. Those kinds of things. They know where they are. And if you set up a really safe, culture in your classroom. About a week or so in, and you do some sight singing just to kind of give them a read on where we are, or do the technique you're going to be doing, whatever your skill is. This applies to anything. They can tell you. So this is 3 levels. They can kind of self-identify where they are in that bell curve. Are they just kind of on level, like where you would expect them to be for that class? Are they kind of ahead of the curve? Or are they behind the curve in some way? Because either they're new, they transferred in, they were at another school and they used a different sight singing system, like you used movable dough and they did numbers or something like that. They're from out of state where they're like, we just sang big concerts and we never did any sight reading. You know, they're fabulous musicians and great singers, but they never learned how to sight sing. It could be anything. Or a student that's been singing, like that's a theater student that's been singing in musical theater and they really want to learn more about music, so they show up on your front doorstep as a junior and want to be in choir for the first time. Well, you don't want to put them in with the freshmen, you want to just catch them up. So this is how you do that. So the 3 levels, here we go. So level 2 is your on level, and it's exactly what you would expect. You've got a handout for this where you can kind of see it. Level 2 is your on level students, and I'll let you kind of read that for yourself. But we're talking about, you know, they're comfortable, they can keep up, they do fine. They're probably not going to be really excited about having to do an assessment where they have to do it all by themselves. But in the ensemble setting, they're good. Then you've got your students that are behind the curve, literally here with our bell curve, right? And a lot of times this is just specific to the solfege. There's something about the solfege which is a mnemonic, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. There's something about the solfege or the system that you're using that's kind of not working for them. Instead of it being a tool to help, it's the thing that is the barrier. That's the most common issue with this. And they're going to kind of tend to just want to hide in the ensemble, just like we showed a minute ago in our little cartoon. And they certainly are going to avoid having to sight sing by themselves, if at all possible. Because then that will kind of out them that they're not really getting it. Whoops. Sorry? Let me just pull it back up. Oh, PowerPoint just quit. Okay. We'll just do it. So the third one, while I'm pulling that back up, is your students that are ahead of the curve. And it's like everything else, they got it. They're doing it. They're rolling right through. They're not having difficulty with it. And when you do something a second time, but they nailed it the first time, they're just not really excited about that. So they need something to do that's going to stretch them out and keep them engaged. They really tire of being the one that's just, well, you be the leader for us. And they're like, you know, I'm not here to teach everybody else. What am I going to learn? And that's a valid question. That's not a bad attitude. They need to be extended. They need to be challenged as well. So, let me find our slide here real quick. Yep, there it is. So we've got to keep them involved too. Yes. So let's talk about the procedure that we just did. The 30 seconds I gave you can be, there's a lot of different things to kind of call that, but the best label I've ever seen for it is a priming task. We do all kinds of priming tasks before we do things. We'll count the rhythm, or we'll chant something, or we'll finger through something on an instrument. There's all kinds of things that we do as priming tests before we really play or sing. And so the priming task for this was just to give you 30 seconds to just kind of self-prime, just to self-prepare, which is not a bad thing to do because then everybody does what works for them. But they have to practice that, and there's things you have to do to teach them to do it. And then we're going to sing for mastery, and that means mastery for everybody, or at least the level 2s. And maybe you let the level 1s catch up sometimes, but you really want to sing for mastery for everybody if at all possible, at least for the vast majority of your students. And so that's usually going to take more than one repetition. So let's start with accommodations, and then you want to be consistent. You don't want to say, well, this time let's sing this on numbers, but then the next time we'll use movable dough. You know, be really consistent with your systems and what you're using. So take a look. Oh, before we do that, let's get into the word audiation because we're going to talk about that in a minute. This is an interesting term. It was initially coined by Edwin Gordon, specifically in relation to music aptitude tests for students. The PMMA, IMMA, things that a lot of you have heard about here because Dr. Lang's a really expert, is an expert in this. Some places not so much. And then it developed for secondary kids into a teaching strategy, music learning theory, which is a teaching strategy. And so if you talk to someone that's an Edwin Gordon person, they would tell you that if you're doing anything other than exactly the way it's defined for those specific tasks, you're misusing the term. You're using it wrong. That's not what it really means. And they are correct. Relative to those aptitude tests and music learning theory, That is not incorrect. If someone looks at you that's a music learning theory person and goes, "You're not audiating," that's not what that really means. Well, with regard to music learning theory, they're right. But here's what's happened with this term. It's evolved. You'll hear it all over the place now. It's evolved into a much more generic term, and that's how we're going to use it today. So specifically, we're not talking about music learning theory or music aptitude tests, nod your head. We're using the term audiation today as it has evolved into a much more generic term. In the same way that most people will call a tissue a Kleenex. Or if you live in the South, any soda is a Coke. You're like, what kind of Coke are you going to have? Dr. Pepper. Are you with me? It's just evolved into a very generic term that refers to this act of mental practice, where you're singing or experiencing the music in your mind. And the difference is you're not just hearing it, but really to get really technical, we're talking about that you can derive syntactical information from what you're experiencing from that phenomenon. Are you with me? And in this case, we're talking about notational audiation, where we're going to audiate from the notation. And some of you did that. Some of you just looked at it and kind of sang it, thought through it, kind of sang it in your head. Some of you sang it out loud, and I was watching all of that. Hunter.
This is really valuable information. Will we have access to these slides?
I can give you access, because this is a PowerPoint that I've used for another thing. It's not in your Google stuff, so
Gotcha.
I can get it to you.
Cool.
So, really generic term here. So I don't want to offend the music learning theory people. I don't have a strong opinion about that. I'm not super knowledgeable about it. But I am really aware that I'm using this much more generic term version of the word audiation. It's really just a verb that refers to the method of mental practice that we are using. Are we good? Here we go. So, you have an exercise. So flip over your paper. And so there's things that you do. Let's just go very quickly through these accommodations. Sometimes it's the simplest thing, so let's just do some of this. What I would like you to do is this. I would like the band people, we'll go choral. I would like the choral people to play the role of those level 3 students, right? You're on that behind the curve end, and you're like, I'm having trouble with this. And so you're going to work specifically off your paper. Everybody else, turn your papers over so you can't even see them, and work off the projected screen. Why do you want to project when you're doing something like this? Project as much as possible. What's the advantage? Everybody's looking at the same thing, and it makes it easier for you as the teacher to observe what's happening. Because if somebody's not getting it, they'll have trouble even continuing to look at it. They just won't be able to keep their focus up here. And the quickest way I could tell if you're not getting it is if you're not even looking at it. That's the easiest one. But it keeps everybody's attention up here, where I can kind of watch you watching this, and I can see what you're doing. When you're here inside of your music or band, where you just live behind your stand, it is so easy as an instrumentalist to hide behind your stand. Raise your hand if you've ever hid behind your stand as an instrumentalist. Yes, it's so easy. So if you project,
Only one out of trouble.
right, so like if you got beginning instrument class and everybody's a trumpet, if you project rather than play off that book all the time, then it kind of brings them up and out from behind the stand a little bit, and that can be really helpful. So, here we go. We're going to do this one. I'm going to refresh our pitch. Here's what I would like for you to do. Okay? If you are, while we are doing our priming up here, if you're a level 1, did I have that right? If you're a level 3, that's what it is. I was.
One is low, 3 is high.
Okay, I got it right now. So if you're a level 1, what I want you doing is I want you using your pencil, and I want you writing the solfege in. And keep writing the solfege in, act like it's taking you time, play the role. So that some of you aren't even finished by the time we sing. And what you're going to do, and you'll get used to this because you do this every day, you're going to write the syllables in until you're done writing syllables in, and then when you're done, then you join us. And I'll know by where your eyes are,
Yes.
where you are. Does that make sense?
You just have
Everybody else, here's the pitch. Everybody sing the tonic try it out loud. Do, mi, so. Everybody ready to go?
Do, mi, so, mi, do, so, do.
I would like you to audiate for 30 seconds. Just mentally practice to prime. Everybody. I see how some of you are even writing the full solfege in and not just the first letter, which is fine. If you want to shorthand it to make it quicker, go ahead. All right. Good for you. Everybody say do again. Ready and go. Do. Remember level ones. If you guys are still writing, just take your time and join us when you're ready. Everybody, here we go. 1, 2, ready, and sing.
Do, do, re, mi, re, sol, la, sol.
Good for you.
So, fa, mi, re, do, ti, re, do. Do, re, mi, re, sol, la, sol. So, fa, mi, re, do, ti, re, do.
Pretty good. Did you notice, everybody, we had a little bit of an issue going back to re. We're hearing do in our head because we've just sung the tonic triad. I see some people nodding, right? Get your eyes ahead and make sure you're looking. Question. What are all of the skips? What are the intervals in this all aligning? Does anybody kind of see what's new? Before, the last chapter we did, everything was either do or mi or so. All the skips were do or mi or so. So what are the skips today?
The
Yes.
dominant chords.
Well, that's a really advanced answer for a high school kid. I'm really glad that you know that it's a dominant chord. What do we got here? We do have some fourths. That's exactly right. Good for you for outlining those fourths. What are the syllables involved? The solfege syllables involved in our skip today. Yes.
Re, so.
We got re and so. Anything else?
T.
Yes? And T and re. So we only have so and T and re. And so in solfege, if we were going to build a chord on that, the bottom note is so. So in the same way that the tonic chord is do and mi and so, we would call that the do chord. Today, all the new stuff is the so chord. The real name of the so chord is the dominant chord, the same way that the do chord has a real name, tonic. And so today, all of our skips are in the dominant chord or the so chord. What you're going to notice now, let's take a look at this. The accommodation, in case you haven't looked at it, take a look at your paper. The accommodation was the first pitch in every measure, just to kind of give them a checkpoint. So at max, they're only going to have to write 4, 5, 6 notes if there's 8 notes, that sort of thing. Just to kind of check them along the way. Take a look at this next one. This one, anything that's a skip, and in this chapter, it would basically mean it would only be stuff that's so or T, T or re, right? Re to so. It would only be the so chord. That's this one. So take a look at this one. This time, I would like the string people to be the level ones and right. We're going to move this around. Everybody else is level 2 or 3. And this time, what we're going to do is we're going to chant. Just speak your solfege. Ready and go. So,
Mi, re, do, re, so, so. Re, so, la, so, fa, mi.
Everybody's eyes on the screen unless you're a string.
So, mi, re, do, re, so, so.
Everybody's eyes up.
Re, so, mi, do, do.
Very good. Here's your chord. Here's your tonic. Tonic triad. Ready to go?
Do, mi, so, mi, do, so, do.
Sing your first note.
So,
Ready and go.
so, mi, re, do, re, so, so. Re, so, la, so, fa, mi. So, mi, re, do, re, so, so.
And stop. Well, we'll see if you did that whole thing. And so the point is this. If you're not quite done writing, which Mariah only did about half of it for us, which is a great example, and then she kind of stopped and tried to sing. It takes a couple times, but if this becomes a normal part of your class, they get used to it. You walk up to them and just say, doing great, just take your time, finish writing, don't worry about singing until you can do it. Why? Until they can even name the syllables, the the sulfate system isn't helping at all. If they have to think about what to even call it, then that's what their brain's doing.